Lugo was brilliant once again, so let's talk about it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I do some producing, some hosting, and some co-hosting as well. So I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and we're going to have a little bit more coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes on them. But if you're worried about finding the right parts and how to fix your car, basically, well, eBay Motors is going to have you covered. They're always going to have the right part that fits your needs. But again, more on them coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Questions and comments can always be left to me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15 or on YouTube, our official Locked On Royals page, which, by the way, be sure to subscribe at. Well, the Royals finally snapped their 3-game losing streak, and it's funny because 3 games isn't that much. I felt like last night was a little bit of a boiling point. Not that everybody that was following me or that was commenting was thinking the sky was falling, but last night just felt like one of those low points of the season. And that is crazy to say because it was a 3-game losing streak, but I almost think it was magnified a little bit because it was the Minnesota Twins, a team that the Royals, quite honestly, need to be able to compete with if they plan on playing in the postseason. Now, right now, they have built a 4-game cushion on Minnesota after tonight's win, and they have a 5.5-game cushion, might be 6 games at this point. Not sure what Boston did today. Actually, they lost to the Orioles, so they have a 6.5-game cushion in the wild card spot. So no real concerns right now, but last night there was something about losing that game with Cole Reagans on the bump, and I called Simeon Woods Richardson a rookie before the game yesterday. That was incorrect, but to me, he basically was a rookie. Didn't have a lot of games under his belt, and the Royals still lost that game. They lost 4-2. They brought the go-ahead run to the plate in the bottom of the 9th inning with nobody out and didn't get any runs out of that. So it was one of those frustrating Royals losses. But, sometimes, which is the approach I've tried to take, is that when this team is losing and they're not playing well, I don't try to sugarcoat it too much, but I also want to provide a big picture look. And I often go back to, you need to tell yourself, what was the expectation of this team? Where did you realistically expect them to go? Did you expect them to just win every single game and dominate and just crush all the good teams out there? I certainly didn't. I said my season prediction was 80-82, and right now they are far surpassing that. But tonight, unlike last night, where last night felt like a low point, which again, it was only a 3-game losing streak, but 2 of those games came against Minnesota. And Minnesota was a team that was slowly catching fire, and everybody knows they're a team that is going to be in contention when it's all said and done. You're not going to be able to bury Minnesota at the end of May. But unlike last night, tonight was a huge one. Tonight felt like the highest of highs because you were throwing Seth Lugo. The Twins had all the momentum. The Twins got out to a 1-0 lead in this game. But boy, did the Royals respond and respond well. And it just feels like every time Seth Lugo takes the ball, and by the way, now is leading the league in ERA. He has the lowest ERA in Major League Baseball. It's lower than Ranger Suarez of the Philadelphia Phillies. It's lower than Tarek Skubal of the Tigers, Reese Olson as well, Tanner Houck, Shoto over in Chicago, lower than all of them. Right? Seth Lugo, who was a reliever 2 years ago, 10 quality starts on the year. And if it wasn't for a Bobby Witt Jr. error 2 starts ago, it would have been 11 of 12. 11 of 12 quality starts for Kansas City. And tonight with him taking the ball, like this is what you hoped Seth Lugo would be. Well, you're losers of 3 in a row, 4 in a row. You need a stopper. We talked about a stopper being Cole Reagans, and I still want to give him that title. But folks, Seth Lugo appears to be the stopper. He didn't even have his best stuff tonight, and he got through 6 innings and allowed just 1 run. He walked a season-high 3 batters. Still didn't matter. And the Twins were making him work for it, just making him grind through every at-bat. It didn't matter in the long run. He was just that effective. And I posed this question on Twitter earlier today because MLB put out this postseason bracket. If the season ended today, yada, yada, yada. And the Royals would be going to Baltimore to take on the Orioles. And if you're not really familiar, the postseason format with the wild card series, whoever the higher seed is, they get all 3 games at home. There is no game 1s at the higher seed, then game 2s, the lower seed, then back to game 3. It's all 3 games at the higher seed's place. So I posed this question of who would you start in game 1, Seth Lugo or Cole Reagans? Now, the leading vote getter was Seth Lugo, and I think just overall because of the numbers and the recency bias, the prisoner of the moment was that Cole Reagans was coming off 5 innings of 3 earned runs, even though 2 of them, in my opinion, were really only earned. And Seth Lugo hadn't made the start yet. And then tonight goes out there and throws 6 innings of 1-run ball. I'm not going to go there just yet and say the Royals are gearing up for the postseason because they're not. They're in a really good spot right now. But I think they are very aware of the fact they got 2 more months until they can really start lining it up of we're going to be making moves, and we're going to talk about this coming up in the next segment. We're going to be making moves. We are setting up this rotation to be great in the playoffs. I mean, the Royals are not going to be the alpha if they get there in October. They're going to be one of the storylines of the postseason because what the Royals are doing right now, and if they get to the playoffs, is something that we haven't really seen in Major League Baseball, to go from 106 losses to maybe 90-plus wins. It would be the biggest single-season jump we've ever seen. Right? So if you get to that point, what I've loved about this idea, toying with postseason baseball again, is that you could look at it and say, well, this Royals team is spunky and they're inexperienced and it's a nice story, but they're going to get stomped on in the playoffs. Or they could be a really tough matchup because of their rotation. You got to go through Reagans and Lugo in game 1 and game 2. I mean, I pictured it this way when I saw that if the season ends today bracket. Baltimore's an alpha. They are a team nobody wants to see. But if Baltimore takes on Kansas City, just in this fun hypothetical, it's not like they're getting, credit to Brady Singer, how good he's been, but it's not like they're getting Singer and Marsh back-to-back. And even though Marsh was great in the 2 starts he had against Baltimore, they've got to worry about Reagans, who's a Cy Young betting favorite, or one of them, top 5, and now Lugo, who's sneaking into that conversation. Like, that's not easy to go up against. So, again, you can leave your comment, whether it be Lugo or Reagans, if they were to start in the postseason today, who would game 1 be? Well, probably the guy that has the lowest ERA in all of baseball. And if not, there's still good reasons for it. You throw Reagans out there as your hammer in game 1. If you win, now you got Lugo for game 2. But if you lose, you got the steady hand of Seth Lugo. This is going down right now, at least through the first 12 starts of the year. This is going down as one of the greatest offseason signings in Royals history. We'll probably have a segment a little bit later on in the year, depending where this goes with Seth Lugo. But everybody, I think, is aware of the fact that David Cone was the best offseason acquisition the Royals ever had. But it is a little bit tricky because he was a Royal, then he left and he came back as a Royal, but it was a free agent signing. He was phenomenal. That has always kind of been known as the greatest offseason signing. But David Cone was also really good before he came back to Kansas City. Seth Lugo was good as a starter for 1 year, and he's 34. And now he's leading the league in ERA. You know, that to me is the baffling part. Seth Lugo wanted that extra year. The Royals gave it to him, and some people said, hey, that's really good value. but you're not going to get Cy Young votes for Seth Lugo. Well, right now, at least, even though it's early, he's put himself into that conversation. It's truly remarkable what he's done. And tonight, you needed that from Seth Lugo. You're 35-22. You feel good at least you grabbed one game, and hell, now go grab a split. Go take the game tomorrow, walk out of Minnesota, not feeling bad at all about that road trip. Not bad at all. You would have another winning road trip. You head back to Kansas City for a packed crowd against San Diego. Pretty fired up after tonight's win against the Minnesota Twins, 6-1. Seth Lugo gets his 9th win of the season. Nobody on the Royals had more than 8 last year. Brady Singer led the team in wins with 8. Seth Lugo has now topped that. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, just how early will the Royals make a trade? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to a few of the sponsors today, starting with eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. An eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. We also want to let you know about one of our brand new sponsors here and locally here in PXG Golf. The other day, I went and got fitted for long range game, a driver. I talked about it a little bit in yesterday's episode. So great over there. They use the TrackMan, which is what the pros use. Very fun to use over there. I got to see my exit velocity, my swing speed, and really got fitted to the perfect club. I'm not the most experienced golfer, but I walked away feeling much more confident in my game, in my skills, because that driver fit me perfectly. They have a little golf simulator so you can see where you're hitting the ball. It only takes about 40 minutes, so about $25. Very fun over at PXG Golf. So to tell you a little bit more about that, they made me a believer, and they'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxggolf.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City. That's at 7517 West 119th in Overland Park. Get fitted for any clubs, and you'll get a dozen golf balls for free. That's pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals. A very fun place to go learn more about your golf game. To talk a little bit more about this Royals team that has snapped this 3-game slide. And I think for, a lot of us out there, you still are proceeding with caution. Maybe not all of you. Maybe you are buying into the hope here. Maybe you are buying in to this optimism. And 57 games is no small sample size. That's 1/3 of the way through the season. And I think for Major League Baseball, it's kind of funny because if you're good, you say this is a big enough sample size. If you're not good, you say it's only 57 games. But it's better to be at the Royals spot right now than maybe somebody like the Tigers, who are 500 and really win-loss-wise, the best division in all of baseball, the American League Central. Talent-wise, I don't think it's there, but just win-loss-wise, there's 3 teams in the Central that have 30 wins. So for the Royals to be this team that's in second place, and they have one of the best run differentials in baseball, you kind of feel like most of this is for real. This starting rotation, as long as it stays healthy, is going to keep them in a lot of games. But I think what's more exciting about it is that we're going to be entering the month of June in a spot that the Royals haven't been in since 2017. And even in 2017, they weren't in as good of a spot as the Royals are in right now. The fun part about this year is that the Royals could be just on the cusp of a window here, a window of contention. Because I don't think the Royals view themselves as a one and done. Hey, they made some moves in the offseason. It's all great and dandy. You go get bounced in the wild card series. Let's all celebrate. Let's throw a parade. It's not that. But Tom Verducci put out an article the other day. I think it was a couple days ago. I think it was on Sports Illustrated, if I'm not mistaken, or one of those, sports outlets. I know it's a very broad range there. But Tom Verducci said that he has some sources that the Royals have been very active in internal discussions about who they want to acquire at the deadline, and that they are not viewing this as a step ahead of schedule. That it's, this team's overperformed, but we're not going to make any moves, and we're just going to see where this goes. It appears that the Royals front office is going to be aggressive, and they are going to try to upgrade this team any way that they can. And that, to me, gets my blood pumping. If you haven't been able to tell in this podcast episode, really fired up despite not having the usual setup here, the good camera, the good audio. It's what I got because my computer's in the Apple store right now trying to get reset and see if I can figure everything out. But who knows on all of that. But I'm still fired up here because this team is 13 games over 500. They've gotten through the first 2 months of the season, and they haven't been swept. They haven't been swept at all. And if I'm being quite honest with you, it hasn't been close since the first game of the series. First series of the year. It hasn't been close. They walked into that final game against Minnesota and against Bailey Ober, and they tagged him for 9 runs in 2 innings and just smashed Minnesota on their way out of Kansas City. That's the only other time I can remember things got a little bit dicey on if they were going to be swept. So you've got this team that has been so competitive through the first 2 months. And now you enter June, and you're still in the midst of this brutal 6-series stretch that we've been talking about. And it sounds like the front office is going to be aggressive. They're not going to sit idly by and watch this outfield continue to be the worst in Major League Baseball. To throw guys like Hunter Renfroe, MJ Melendez out there every single day and just cross your fingers that they're going to get better. It appears the Royals are going to try to upgrade to make sure this start is all for naught. Because I'm curious to everybody's thoughts out there. When you are 13 games over 500 and you are entering the month of June, you don't want to let an opportunity like this slip, regardless of what year of contention you're in, whether it's year 1 or year 5. Because starts like this in Kansas City, for that matter, haven't been common. They've been very rare. And to me, it's all about cashing in now. Not that you have to go all in, but you need to do enough to ensure that this start leads to a postseason berth, to put yourself back on the map, to pull yourself out of the depths. And I think for other teams in the Central, for other teams in the American League, to give you that respect, it's not so much about this start. Because I think nationally, still some teams and some people out there are thinking they're going to bottom out. They're going to come back down to earth. They're going to even out. But even if they even out and they play 500 ball the rest of the way, they're going to be playing in October. That's the great part about this start. You don't want to be the 2021 Padres, which Verducci points out in this article, where they went 12-34 to close out the season and missed the playoffs. I mean, they are putting themselves so far this season in conversations that few teams that lose 100+ games the year before are ever in. I mean, you look at Oakland right now, what they did last year, that's a significant jump for them so far this season. I mean, truly, they already have 23, 24 wins. That would have been considered a step forward for Kansas City. But right now, they hold a firm wild card spot. They're only a few games out of first, and they have one of the best run differentials in all of baseball. They can be buyers, and maybe they can be buyers as early as June, because to me, that's been the benchmark. You get to June, and some of these guys still aren't showing that they're everyday players. You can go ahead and try to make a move to bolster some part of your team, whether that's the outfield or whether that's the bullpen. I do envision a couple of moves the Royals are going to make coming up in the next month or so. I don't think they're going to be waiting till the deadline. I think they're going to be looking for some guys here in the month of June to try to bolster this lineup and maybe even bolster this bullpen. Before we move on to our final segment, I want to tell you a little bit about Locked On Sports Today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the 2014 team and what we could maybe anticipate getting later into the year and why it doesn't need to be a panic button moment for the Kansas City Royals. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we dive in any further, I want to give a shout out to the final sponsor today in FanDuel. It's a winner-take-all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're worried about not making enough money, you're worried about losing some money, you don't know what to bet on, I believe that you can always find your niche. And for me, it's usually college football, college basketball, placing some over-unders and stuff like that. I actually won a little bit of money on an NBA playoff game not too long ago. I believe it was on the Boston Celtics now that I think about it. And, moving forward, probably going to place a few more bucks down on some player props as well. And even some baseball games. I might place some money down on the Royals tomorrow against the Minnesota Twins in a split game. Maybe more so on Brady Singer and the strikeouts. But that also may be up to you if you want to join me in that. So do so over at FanDuel. Well, I do think at times Royals fans have a tendency of comparing every good team or every good start or a bullpen or rotation or a lineup or a player to the teams that you hold dear to your heart. And for a lot of us here in Kansas City, that would be the 2014 and 2015 squad. And what is so hilarious to me, at least, is that, earlier today, there was an account I was going back and forth with on Twitter, really not too much back and forth, just a response, if you will, about this team. And they were in a 3-game losing streak. And this one individual said, this team could never be the great 2014 and 2015 teams. And I think in 2015 team, that's fair to make the judgment. That team dominated from start to finish. And even though this Royals team right now is a better record through 57 games than the 2015 squad did, the 2015 squad pretty much led the AL Central from start to finish. They didn't have to sweat it out too much. In fact, they were awful in September and still won the division by a lot because they had 95 wins. I mean, it just wasn't that close. And I don't envision the Royals winning 95 games this year. I'd gladly take 85 to 90 and get in with that 88, 89 wins or wild card game and see where it goes from there. The 2014 team, though, was much different. And I think for a lot of us, you can remember that. And what I pointed out was, we thought the 2014 team was so good because of their postseason run and really their second half push. About 100 games into the year, they didn't have a winning record. They were 48-50. 48-50. Had lost 4 in a row on July 21st. And in 5 of their last 7 games, they had scored 1 run or less. Think about that. When you're complaining about the offense and, this lineup sucks, yada, 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 the 2014 Royals were 100 games into the year, almost 100 games in the year, and we're having outputs like that. Yeah, the bullpen was great. Yeah, they had some great players. But there were moments in 2014 where you really couldn't squint and even see a winning team, a team that finished with a winning record. They had demoted Mike Moustakas. They had fired their hitting coach. It wasn't pretty, right? And that's baseball, right? There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a chance this team is sitting pretty at the All-Star breaks and collapses in the second half. Who knows? Who really knows until we get to that point. But what I'm getting at here is that there is going to come a point in time where this Royals team struggles more than 3 games. And even if they win a game and snap a losing streak, they might win 2 of 8. They might piece together, a few wins and a bad stretch, but they're just not playing good ball, right? And you hope that it's not when a postseason race is really coming down to the wire, a pennant race is coming down to the wire. You hope it's not at that point in time. But what I look at here is, honestly, even with the 2014 team, there were aspects to them that far surpassed the 2024 squad. They had an elite bullpen that was so untouchable that if you had a 1-run lead at any point in the season, they were going to be able to lock it down. The rotation, I'd take the 2024 team. The star player, I'd take the 2024 team with Bobby Witt Jr. I mean, there are better players on this team, but maybe not a better rounded team. I think the 2014 squad was well-rounded, that there weren't too many holes in the lineup. There weren't star players. They just really complemented each other. There's arguably more star power on the 2024 squad. And, it's funny to me because the 2014 team was seen as this juggernaut almost because they swept their way to the World Series. Could you imagine hearing when they had lost 4 in a row? They lost that game in Chicago on July 21st after they'd been swept in Boston right after the All-Star break. And if I told you they would have swept their way to the World Series and got to Game 7, you wouldn't have believed me. I remember all the comments being made. That was when Fire Ned Yost started happening. Oh, this was such a fraudulent team. Get rid of Dayton Moore. And they had a strong second half push. Now, the best case scenario for this Royals team is they don't need a strong second half push to get into playoffs, but I'd imagine that is going to happen. They're going to need really good play in the second half to sustain this because the American League, in my opinion, is tougher now than it was back then. I mean, the wild card teams are going to be 90-win teams. I believe the top wild card team is going to be the AL East second place finisher. That's either going to be the Baltimore Orioles or the New York Yankees, and I think both of those teams win over 95 games. That's a wild card team. I think the second place wild card team's going to win about 90. And the third place one, right behind that, 88, 89 games. That's where I'm at this point. That's how good the American League can be. The National League is falling a little bit behind right now, but they still got the Dodgers. That even without Ronald Acuna Jr., the Braves are going to be a gauntlet. You look at Philly, they are, even with their weak schedule, you don't want to run into them in the playoffs. They always seem to be great. And now you see the Giants playing better ball. You can see the Padres, who the Royals will see this weekend, playing better ball. The Cubs, the Brewers, it can be tough on the National League side. But the American League, man, it can be a 90-win or up entire postseason bracket. It could be a 90-plus win bracket. And you're going to have a couple of 105, 106-win teams. I mean, it's going to be tough to get through that. But again, who knows? The Royals' goal should just be getting their foot in the door and seeing what happens, because just getting to October baseball would be a 2 million% success for the Royals in 2024. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15 and download us on wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and on YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to have a morning episode previewing this series finale in Minnesota and take a quick peek in this upcoming series against the San Diego Padres. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.